The air in Alistair Finch's penthouse was a carefully curated vacuum, smelling of nothing but success. It was the scent of polished marble, conditioned leather, and the faint, almost sterile aroma of ozone from the state-of-the-art air purification system. From the 70th floor, the city of New York sprawled below like a circuit board of infinite silent light, a kingdom viewed from an untouchable throne. Every surface within the apartment was a mirror of cold, hard perfection, from the gleaming black granite of the kitchen island to the floor-to-ceiling windows that rendered the sky a piece of framed, moving art. There were no family photos on the walls, no cluttered shelves, no signs of the messy, chaotic business of living. It was less a home and more a monument to power, a gilded cage built of glass and steel, where every object was placed with architectural precision, and every human interaction felt scripted. It was in this sterile cathedral of wealth that Elena moved, a ghost in a simple gray uniform, her presence designed to be felt only in its absence, in the perfection she maintained. Her movements were economical and silent, a lifetime of practice in the art of being invisible. But beneath the quiet efficiency of the housekeeper, a different person lived and breathed. Inside Elena's mind was a library of details, a fortress of memory meticulously constructed over years of silent observation. Her hands, now calloused from cleaning solutions and repetitive motions, had once held a camera with the steady grip of a surgeon, capturing the subtle truths hidden in corporate reports and the fleeting expressions on the faces of powerful men. She was Elena, former valedictorian of Columbia University's journalism program, a specialist in corporate investigation whose promising career had been violently extinguished before it could truly begin. Every day, as she polished the chrome fixtures in Alistair Finch's world, she felt the phantom weight of her press pass in her pocket, the remembered thrill of chasing a lead, the sharp analytical part of her brain cataloging every detail of this house, every overheard snippet of conversation, every document left carelessly on a desk. She was not just a maid, she was a dormant volcano of intellect and purpose, waiting for the precise moment to erupt. Her purpose had a name, Laura, her older sister. The memory of Laura was a sunburst in the cold expanse of Elena's daily life, a vibrant image of a woman whose brilliance could have changed the world. Laura, a geneticist with a mind like a diamond, had been on the verge of a breakthrough, a patent that promised to revolutionize gene therapy. But her small research firm had been a lamb in a world of wolves, and Alistair Finch had been the hungriest wolf of all. He hadn't just acquired the company, he had devoured it, stripping it of its assets, stealing Laura's life's work, and burying her under a mountain of litigation until her professional reputation was shattered and her spirit was broken. The stress, the ruin, the utter despair of seeing her legacy stolen had fueled a silent illness that took her far too soon. Elena was left with nothing but the crushing medical debts, the hollow ache of her sister's absence, and a single sacred relic she protected with her life, a faded photograph of Laura, her face radiant with a joy so pure it was painful to behold, holding her newborn son. This is a story you won't want to miss. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. We love seeing our global audience. And if you enjoy stories where justice is served, make sure you're subscribed. The stage was now set in the quietest room of the penthouse, the one place where a sliver of warmth was permitted to exist, the bedroom of Alistair's young son, Leo. The boy sat on the plush white carpet, his eyes wide with innocent curiosity, looking at the faded photograph in Elena's hand. He saw a woman with a kind smile, a smile that felt strangely familiar. Elena's voice was soft, a gentle murmur that was a stark contrast to the silent, oppressive authority of the home. She was not just showing him a picture, she was planting a seed of truth, a quiet act of rebellion in the heart of the enemy's fortress. For a few precious moments, she was not the maid, but an aunt, connecting her nephew to the memory of the mother he never knew. The spell was broken by the sound of expensive leather shoes on the polished oak floor. Alistair Finch entered the room not like a father, but like a CEO, entering a boardroom where an unauthorized meeting was taking place. He was a man sculpted from ambition and disdain, his tailored suit, a suit of armor, his posture radiating an unassailable sense of ownership over everything and everyone in his orbit. His gaze swept the room, first landing on his son, the heir to his empire, and then sliding to Elena, his expression curdling into one of cold annoyance. To him, she was not a person but a function, a part of the household machinery that was currently malfunctioning. He did not see a woman with a story or a soul. He saw a uniform, an employee who had overstepped her invisible, yet rigidly defined, boundaries. The air grew thick and heavy, the quiet warmth of the moment instantly evaporating under the chilling force of his presence. His voice, when it came, was not loud, but it cut through the silence with the precision of a scalpel. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed without question, laced with the casual cruelty of a man who has never been told no. He gestured with a flick of his wrist, a dismissive wave that relegated Elena and her personal effects to the status of trash. He didn't look at her directly, instead addressing a point on the wall just over her shoulder, a classic power move, designed to dehumanize and diminish. The words were coated in a thin veneer of civility, but the contempt beneath was unmistakable. He saw the faded photograph in her hand, not as a cherished memory, but as a piece of clutter, a personal trinket that was contaminating the pristine environment he had curated for his son. It was an intrusion of the lower world into his sanctified space, and it was an offense that required immediate correction. The humiliation was intended to be swift and absolute. He took a step forward, his shadow falling over Elena and the small boy on the floor. His intention was clear. He was going to take the photograph to physically remove this unwelcome piece of her life from his son's view, and in doing so, reassert his total dominance over his home and everyone in it. The gesture was meant to put her in her place, to remind her that her personal history, her memories, her very identity, had no value here. They were irrelevant. She was a service, not a person. His hand, adorned with a heavy gold signet ring, reached out, not with overt aggression, but with the unthinking entitlement of a king swatting away a fly. It was the casual, effortless cruelty of a man who believed he was so far above others that their feelings were not even a consideration. But as his fingers moved to snatch the photograph, something shifted within Elena. Time seemed to warp, stretching and slowing until the moment hung suspended in the silent air. The image of Alistair's condescending face blurred, replaced by a flash of memory so vivid it burned behind her eyes. She saw her sister Laura in a sterile hospital bed, frail and defeated, whispering her last wish for her son's future. She felt the crushing weight of the final hospital bill, a sum so vast it had felt like a death sentence in itself. She remembered the solemn promise she had made to her dying sister, a vow whispered in the quiet, beeping darkness of the ICU, that the truth would one day come out, that justice would be served. This man, this titan of industry reaching for her most precious memory, was not just insulting a maid. He was desecrating a tomb, a fury, cold and solid as steel, solidified in her veins. Her breathing became slow and controlled. Her hands, once trembling almost imperceptibly, became perfectly still. The entire atmosphere in the room changed in a heartbeat. What had been a simple, if tense, domestic scene transformed into a silent, high-stakes standoff. Alistair's forward momentum paused, his hand hovering in the air just inches from the photograph. He had expected fear, or at least a flustered apology and immediate compliance. He had expected the maid to shrink back, to become even smaller and more invisible. Instead, she had become a statue of defiance. She did not flinch. She did not look away. Her gaze, which had been respectfully downcast just moments before, lifted to meet his. There was no fear in her eyes. There was no anger. There was something far more terrifying, a calm, clear, and absolute certainty. The air crackled with unspoken history, with a secret that was about to detonate. And for the first time in his life, Alistair Finch felt a sliver of cold, unfamiliar dread snake its way up his spine. He was no longer looking at a maid. He was looking at his judge, Her posture, which had been a study in subservience for 2 long years, underwent a transformation so profound it was as if a different soul had taken possession of her body. The slight protective curve of her spine straightened, each vertebra locking into place with a silent, resolute click. Her shoulders, once rounded in a permanent posture of apology, squared themselves, creating a silhouette of quiet, unassailable strength. The head that was always respectfully bowed, her gaze fixed on the floor or the task at hand, lifted with a slow, deliberate grace. It was the movement of a queen ascending a throne, not a maid facing her master. A sudden, palpable stillness descended upon the room, a vacuum where the oppressive weight of Alistair's authority had been. The very air seemed to thin, crackling with an energy he had never felt in his sterile, controlled world. He was witnessing not an act of defiance, but an unveiling. The drab gray uniform seemed to fade into irrelevance, a costume shed to reveal the true person beneath, a woman made not of compliance and fear, but of forged steel, and a purpose that had been tempered in the fires of profound loss. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was the most shocking transformation of all. It was not the soft, deferential murmur he was accustomed to, the voice that answered "Yes, sir," and "Of course, sir," without inflection or identity. This new voice was a thing of crystalline clarity, perfectly pitched and devoid of any tremor of fear or anger. It carried the calm, precise weight of an unalterable fact, a statement being entered into an official record from which it could never be erased. She looked not at him, but at the small, innocent face of the boy on the floor, her expression softening for a fraction of a second with an ocean of unspoken love and sorrow. Then, her eyes, dark and luminous, with an intelligence he had never bothered to notice, lifted to meet his. The words she spoke were simple, yet they landed in the silent room with the force of a physical blow, each syllable a perfectly aimed stone striking the glass walls of his carefully constructed life. "I was just telling him about his mother," she said, her tone even and measured, each word a testament to a truth he had spent a fortune to bury. Alistair Finch, a man who could dismantle a Fortune 500 company with a single phone call, was momentarily paralyzed by sheer incomprehension. His mind, a finely tuned instrument for hostile takeovers and market manipulation, could not process the data it was receiving. The maid, a piece of household equipment, was speaking nonsense. His wife, a woman currently selecting china patterns for their upcoming Hamptons fundraiser, was Leo's mother. The statement was absurd, the ramblings of a disgruntled, perhaps unstable employee. A flicker of irritation crossed his face, the first crack in his composed facade. He opened his mouth to deliver a scathing dismissal, to put this insolent woman back in her place with a single, crushing sentence. He would have her removed, not just from the room, but from the building, her existence wiped from his payroll and his memory. This was a malfunction in the system, a minor annoyance that needed to be corrected swiftly and without a second thought. The sheer audacity of her claim was an insult to his intelligence, an affront to the order of his world. But Elena was not finished. She held the faded photograph out slightly, not as an offering, but as an exhibit. Her gaze remained locked with his, unwavering and analytical, the look of a prosecutor presenting irrefutable evidence. "How she had the same smile," she added, her voice dropping a fraction, gaining an even greater intensity in the quiet. It was this sentence, this simple, devastating observation, that forced his eyes away from hers and down to the small, worn rectangle of paper in her hand. For the first time he truly looked at it, not as a piece of staff clutter, but as the object at the center of this bizarre confrontation. His vision tunneled, the plush carpet and expensive toys in his son's room fading into a meaningless blur. There, frozen in time, was a face he had tried to forget, a face that haunted the darkest corners of his memory. It was the face of Laura, the brilliant, driven geneticist whose research he had stolen, whose company he had gutted, and whose life he had systematically destroyed. Her smile in the photograph was radiant, full of a joy and hope that he had personally extinguished. The blood in Alistair Finch's veins turned to ice. It was a physical sensation, a frigid wave that started in his chest and spread outwards to his limbs, leaving him cold and numb. His breath hitched in his throat, a choked, silent gasp. The photograph in Elena's hand was not just of Laura. Cradled in her arms, wrapped in a simple white blanket, was a newborn baby. His baby. His son. Leo. The world tilted on its axis, the solid marble floors of his $70 million penthouse suddenly feeling like shifting sand beneath his feet. The pieces of the puzzle, scattered for years in the locked vaults of his mind, slammed together with the force of a car crash. Laura, the geneticist he had ruined, her sudden, tragic death, the timeline. And Elena, the quiet, efficient maid who had been moving silently through his home for 2 years, polishing his surfaces, cleaning his son's room, watching. He finally understood. This was not the maid. This was Laura's sister. This was his son's aunt. And she knew everything. The secret he had guarded more fiercely than his bank accounts. The foundational lie upon which his entire legacy was built, was standing before him, holding the proof in her hand. His terror, raw and primal, was a foreign entity in the landscape of his soul. It was an emotion he inflicted, not one he experienced. For a terrifying second, his mask of corporate invincibility crumbled into dust, revealing the panicked, cornered man beneath. The carefully curated calm he projected to the world shattered, and a vein began to pulse violently in his temple. His first instinct was not to negotiate or to understand, but to destroy, to erase the threat. His mind, scrambled by fear, defaulted to its factory settings: aggression, intimidation, and the brute application of power. He saw Elena not as a grieving sister seeking justice, but as a hostile variable that needed to be neutralized. The truth was a virus, and she was patient zero. He had to contain it, to crush it, before it could spread and infect the sterile perfection of his life. His empire was built on a foundation of meticulously crafted lies, and she had just lit a match at its very core. His voice, when he finally found it, was a ragged, unrecognizable thing, a low snarl that was more animal than human. "Get out!" he hissed, the words torn from his throat. He lunged forward, his hand no longer a casual gesture of dismissal but a claw, reaching to snatch the photograph, to destroy the physical evidence of his crime. But his movements were clumsy, his hand shaking with an adrenaline-fueled tremor he couldn't control. He was no longer the master of this space. He was a trespasser in the face of a truth far more powerful than his wealth. Elena, however, did not recoil. She simply held the photograph closer to her chest, her movement fluid and certain. She had anticipated this, the violent lashing out of a caged predator. In his panic, he was confirming everything she had suspected, revealing the depths of his guilt with every ragged breath and every desperate, aggressive gesture. She was in control now, and they both knew it. Inside Elena's mind, the chaos of the room was a distant storm. A profound and chilling calm had settled over her. As he lunged, the image of his contorted, furious face was superimposed with the memory of her sister's pale, exhausted face in the hospital. She could hear the faint, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, a sound that had been the soundtrack to the worst months of her life. She felt the phantom weight of Laura's hand in hers, the skin thin and cool, the grip weak but desperate. "I'm so sorry, Elena," Laura had whispered, her voice barely audible over the hiss of the oxygen machine. "They took everything. They even took my son." And in that moment, standing in the opulent prison Alistair Finch called a home, Elena was no longer just a sister. She was an executor. She was the keeper of a sacred vow, a promise made to the dying that justice, no matter how long it took, would finally be served. His threats were meaningless noise compared to the sacred silence of that hospital room. The eruption was inevitable. Seeing his initial threat fail, seeing the maid stand her ground with that infuriating, unbreakable calm, sent a fresh surge of panicked rage through Alistair. "Security!" he bellowed, his voice echoing unnaturally in the soundproofed luxury of the room. "Now!" He turned back to Elena, his face a mask of pure venom, his eyes promising a world of pain. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he spat, his words a clumsy torrent of corporate jargon and legal threats. "I will bury you. I will sue you into oblivion. You will never work in this city again. I will have you arrested for harassment, for trespassing, for extortion." He was throwing every weapon in his arsenal at her, trying to bludgeon her back into submission, to frighten her back into the role of the invisible, powerless servant. He was a king whose authority had been challenged, and his response was to call for the executioner, to remind the world of his absolute power to create and destroy. Two large men in identical dark suits appeared in the doorway, their movements swift and silent, their faces impassive. They were human extensions of Alistair's will, their purpose simply to remove problems. They assessed the scene with practiced efficiency, the enraged master, the crying child, and the calm, defiant woman at the center of the storm. They did not need to ask questions. Their orders were implicit in the tension that suffocated the room. Alistair pointed a trembling finger at Elena, his command a single, sharp word. Her. The men moved forward, their sheer physical presence designed to intimidate. They were walls of muscle and tailored wool, flanking her on either side. Elena did not resist. There was no need. The first part of her plan, the detonation, was complete. She had confirmed his guilt, she had seen his terror, and she had declared war. This was not a defeat. It was a strategic retreat. As their hands, firm but not yet brutal, took hold of her arms, she allowed herself one last look at the small boy on the floor. Leo had stopped crying, and was now watching the scene with wide, confused eyes, his gaze fixed on her. In that fleeting moment of connection, a silent promise passed between them. It was a vow that went beyond her promise to Laura. It was a new promise, made to him. A promise of truth. A promise of rescue. She would not allow him to be raised in this gilded cage, to be molded into the heir of a man whose legacy was built on theft and deceit. She would come back for him. This thought did not feel like a hope. It felt like a certainty. It was the mission that would fuel every action she took from this moment forward. The cold resolve in her heart was now absolute, an unquenchable flame that would light her way through the darkness ahead. She was marched out of the room, down the long, silent hallway lined with abstract art that was worth more than she had earned in a lifetime. She walked past the gleaming kitchen she had cleaned 1,000 times, past the living room with its panoramic views of a city that had, until now, seemed to offer her nothing but struggle. She was escorted into the private elevator, its mirrored walls reflecting the impassive faces of the security guards and her own strangely serene expression. The descent from the 70th floor was swift and silent, a physical manifestation of her ejection from the world of the powerful. The heavy glass doors of the lobby hissed open, and she was deposited onto the cold, windswept pavement of the Manhattan street. The doors hissed shut behind her, sealing her out, a final, definitive act of banishment. The world of Alistair Finch had expelled her. For a long moment, she just stood there on the sidewalk, the biting November wind whipping at her thin uniform. The sounds of the city, which had been a distant hum from the penthouse, rushed in around her. The blare of horns, the chatter of pedestrians, the distant wail of a siren. The sheer, overwhelming reality of her situation began to settle in. She was jobless. She was effectively homeless, as her small room was in the staff quarters of that very building. She had a few $100s in her bank account, and she had just declared war on one of the most powerful and ruthless men in New York City. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and for the first time a tremor of genuine fear ran through her. His threats echoed in her mind. "I will bury you." He had the resources to do it. He could erase her, professionally and personally, until it was as if she had never existed. The scale of the mountain she had chosen to climb seemed impossibly vast. But then, another image rose to the surface of her mind, eclipsing the fear. It was the photograph. She reached into the pocket of her uniform, her fingers closing around its worn, familiar edges. She pulled it out, shielding it from the wind, and looked at her sister's smiling face one more time. Laura had faced an impossible giant and had been crushed. But Laura had been alone. Elena was not. Elena had the truth, and she had a plan. The fear receded, burned away by the cold, clear flame of her purpose. This was not about revenge. Revenge was a chaotic, emotional act. This was about justice. Justice was a strategy. It required precision, patience, and intellect. The despair that had threatened to swallow her whole solidified into a diamond-hard resolve. He had underestimated her because she was a maid. He had made the classic mistake of the arrogant. He had judged the book by its cover, and in doing so had revealed the entire plot. She began to walk, her steps uncertain at first, then gaining a steady, rhythmic purpose. She was no longer aimlessly adrift. She was on a mission. Her mind, the sharp, analytical tool she had been forced to keep dormant for so long, whirred to life. She began to catalog, to analyze, to strategize. She needed a secure location. She needed resources. Most importantly, she needed allies. A name, long buried under years of menial labor and quiet grief, surfaced in her memory. Professor Miller. Her investigative journalism mentor at Columbia. A cynical, brilliant, old-school newsman who had taught her that the truth was the only weapon that mattered, and that a well-documented story could topple any king. He had always been skeptical of the official narrative surrounding the Finch Biogen takeover, had once muttered to a class that the whole thing smelled rotten. He was her first and best hope. She found a dingy 24-hour convenience store, the harsh fluorescent lights a world away from the soft recessed lighting of the penthouse. She bought a cheap, prepaid burner phone with cash, the first of many precautions she would need to take. Standing in the back of the store, surrounded by the smell of stale coffee and disinfectant, she searched for his number online. He was semi-retired now, listed as a contributing editor for a respected online investigative journal. Her finger hovered over the call button, a moment of hesitation gripping her. It had been nearly a decade. He had been a mentor to hundreds of students. Would he even remember her, the quiet, intense girl who always sat in the front row? She took a deep breath, the air tasting of grit and determination, and pressed the button. She was no longer Elena the maid. She was Elena the journalist, and she was about to file the most important story of her life. The phone rang 3 times before a gruff, familiar voice answered. Miller. He sounded older, more tired, but the sharp edge of impatience was still there. She steadied her own voice, pushing down the tremor of anxiety, channeling the same calm she had felt in Leo's room. Professor Miller, she said, it's Elena. Elena Vargas. I was in your advanced corporate investigation seminar in 2014. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a heart-stopping moment, she thought he would hang up. Then, he spoke again, a flicker of recognition in his tone. Vargas. The valedictorian. The photojournalist. I remember. You disappeared. What do you want? The opening was there. I have a story, Professor, she said, the words coming out in a controlled, even stream. A big one. It's about Alistair Finch. And I have the proof. Another pause, longer this time. Then, the single word that would change everything. Where? They met in a place that was the conceptual opposite of Alistair Finch's world. It was a greasy spoon diner in Hell's Kitchen, a relic from a bygone era with cracked vinyl booths, a sticky countertop, and the pervasive smell of frying onions and old coffee. Professor Miller looked much as she remembered, just with more lines on his face and a deeper weariness in his eyes. He listened intently as she told him everything, his gaze never leaving her face. She recounted the 2 years of silent observation, the stolen moments with Leo, the final confrontation, and then she slid the faded photograph across the Formica tabletop. He picked it up with the careful reverence of an archivist handling a priceless document. He stared at the image of Laura and the baby for a long time, the cynical mask of the veteran journalist falling away to reveal a flicker of profound sadness and a spark of righteous anger. "This is the heart of it," he said, his voice a low rumble. "But it's not the whole story. We need more. We need a weapon, not just a wound." And so, under the buzzing fluorescent lights of a forgotten diner, the war room was established. Professor Miller, energized by a story that reminded him why he had gotten into the business in the first place, began to sketch out a plan on a paper napkin. The photograph was their emotional core, their moral compass. But to destroy a man like Finch, they needed an irrefutable, legally binding paper trail. They needed to prove not just that Leo was Laura's son, but that Alistair had orchestrated his illegal acquisition as part of the larger corporate crime. It was a two-front war, one for the soul of a child, and one for the legacy of a brilliant scientist. The takeover and the adoption, he theorized, were not separate crimes. They were two parts of the same monstrous act of theft. He had stolen her work, and then he had stolen her son to be the heir to the empire built on that work. The sheer diabolical symmetry of it was staggering. Elena's mind, now fully unleashed, became their most powerful asset. She closed her eyes and walked back through the penthouse in her memory. She recalled fragments of conversations, names of law firms mentioned on phone calls, the logo on a stray piece of mail from a private wealth management firm. She remembered the specific security protocols for the Home Office, the cleaning schedule of the other staff, the brief windows of opportunity when Alistair was traveling. She was the insider, the ghost who had seen everything because she was trained to be invisible. She provided the raw intelligence, the human details that could never be found in a database. Miller, in turn, provided the strategic framework and the resources. He had contacts, old friends, and former students, embedded in every corner of the city's legal, financial, and medical establishments. He knew which databases to search, which archives to petition, and which people were most likely to talk if the right pressure was applied. Their first target became clear: the adoption itself. A legal adoption in New York is a fortress of sealed records and judicial orders. A secret, illegal one, however, must have left a trail of corruption. They needed to find the weak link: a coerced signature, a bribed official, a falsified document. They started with the hospital. Based on Leo's age and the timeline of Laura's illness, they narrowed it down to two possibilities. Miller made a call to a trusted source, a veteran medical records administrator who owed him a favor from a story decades ago. He didn't ask for the records themselves, an impossible and illegal request. He asked for something simpler: a list of all maternity ward nurses who had resigned or been terminated within a 3-month window of Leo's birth. It was a long shot, a single thread in a massive, tangled web. 2 days later, hunched over a laptop in the cramped, book-filled apartment Miller kept in the city, they got a response: a short list of 4 names. 3 had logical explanations: a retirement, a move to another state, a career change. But the 4th name stood out: a senior maternity nurse named Maria Sanchez, who had resigned abruptly, citing only personal reasons, 2 weeks after Leo was born. A quick financial background check, pulled by one of Miller's contacts, revealed something even more interesting. A month after her resignation, Maria Sanchez had paid off her 30-year mortgage in a single cash payment. It was the first concrete piece of evidence, the first tremor in the foundation of Alistair Finch's empire. They had found their thread. Now all they had to do was pull, and pray that the entire monstrous tapestry would unravel. The hunt had officially begun. Finding Maria Sanchez was not a matter of simply looking up a name in a phone book. It was an act of delicate digital archaeology, a careful excavation of a life that had been deliberately buried. From the cramped, book-lined command center of Professor Miller's apartment, the air thick with the scent of aging paper and brewing coffee, Elena delved into the digital ghost of the former nurse. She moved with a methodical patience that bordered on obsession, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a muscle memory she thought she had lost. She sifted through voter registration records, old property deeds, and the faint, dusty footprints left on long dormant social media profiles. Each dead end, each outdated address, was not a failure but a piece of data, slowly narrowing the field of possibilities. She was not just looking for a person, she was reconstructing a narrative of fear and flight, piecing together the story of a woman who had taken a large sum of money and then spent the next 6 years trying to become invisible. It was a pattern she understood intimately, the instinct to retreat from a world that had become too dangerous. Professor Miller watched her work, a sense of grim pride in his tired eyes. He saw in her the same relentless drive he had recognized in his classroom a decade ago, now honed to a razor's edge by grief and purpose. He acted as her anchor, her strategic counsel, preventing her from getting lost in the weeds of the investigation. While she hunted for the individual, he explored the system that had enabled the crime. He used his old press credentials to access LexisNexis archives, pulling up every piece of public information on the hospital's board of directors from that time, looking for connections to Finch Biogen. He mapped out the corporate ecosystem, creating a web of names and affiliations on a large whiteboard that covered one entire wall of his study. They were building a two-pronged attack, one aimed at the human heart of the conspiracy and the other at its cold corporate brain. The whiteboard became their battlefield map, a chaotic but brilliant tapestry of arrows, names, and question marks, with a faded photograph of Laura and Leo pinned directly in its center, the moral true north of their entire operation. After 3 days of relentless searching, they found her, not through a brilliant digital breakthrough, but through a piece of old-fashioned human detective work. Elena had noticed a recurring name, commenting on an old family photo of Maria's, a cousin. A quick search of the cousin's more active social media profile revealed a recent post, a group picture from a family baptism just 2 months prior. And there, in the back row, was an older, more tired-looking Maria Sanchez, her face etched with a permanent anxiety. The location tag on the photo was for a small Catholic church in Astoria, Queens. It was enough. They now had a neighborhood, a community, a place where she felt safe enough to be seen. The knowledge landed with a heavy weight in the small apartment. The theoretical hunt was over. Now came the far more dangerous part, the human confrontation. The moment they stepped out of the digital world and into the real one, they would be exposed, and the clock would truly start ticking. The plan to approach her was debated for hours. Miller argued for a direct journalistic approach, knock on the door, state the facts, and apply pressure. He believed fear was the key to unlocking the truth, but Elena, remembering the look of sheer terror on Alistair Finch's face, knew that fear could also be a cage. It could make a person shut down, deny everything, and run. She argued for a different path, one of empathy. Maria Sanchez was not their enemy. She was Alistair's first victim, a woman coerced or bribed into betraying her professional ethics and her own conscience. To win her over, they couldn't come as accusers. They had to come as confessors, offering her a path to absolution. Elena would go alone. She would not bring a recorder, she would not bring a notepad. She would bring only the photograph of her sister, a single, potent symbol of the human cost of the secret Maria had been carrying for 6 long years. It was a gamble, a dangerous one, but it was the only way she could imagine breaking through the wall of guilt and fear that Maria had surely built around herself. Astoria was a world away from the cold glass and steel of Midtown Manhattan. It was a neighborhood of brick row houses, of families and communities, where the smell of grilling food hung in the air and the sounds of children playing echoed in the streets. Elena found Maria's house, a modest, impeccably kept home with a small garden of late-blooming roses out front. The paid-off mortgage had bought her a fortress of normalcy, a quiet life that was, in itself, a lie. Elena stood on the sidewalk for a long time, the photograph feeling heavy in her coat pocket. Her heart hammered against her ribs. a frantic drumbeat of anticipation and dread. Every instinct she had as an investigator screamed at her to be cautious, to have backup, to have an escape plan. But a deeper instinct, the one that came from her sister's memory, told her that this had to be an act of faith. She took a deep breath, walked up the short concrete path, and knocked on the door, the sound echoing with a finality that seemed to seal her fate. The woman who answered was smaller than she had appeared in the photograph, and the lines of worry on her face were etched far deeper. When she saw Elena, a polite but weary confusion flickered in her eyes. She saw a stranger, a potential salesperson, or someone lost looking for directions. But when Elena simply held up the photograph, without saying a word, the blood drained from Maria Sanchez's face. Recognition was instant and absolute. It was not just the woman in the picture she recognized, but the baby she had held, the one whose record she had altered, the one whose existence had financed her quiet, guilt-ridden life. Her hand flew to her mouth, a choked gasp escaping her lips. Her eyes, wide with a terror that had been dormant for years, darted past Elena, scanning the street for a threat, for the inevitable arrival of the powerful man who had bought her silence. She tried to slam the door, a panicked, reflexive action of self-preservation. But Elena was ready. She didn't push back with force. She simply spoke, her voice low and steady, imbued with a sorrow that cut through the panic. "Please," she said, the words a quiet plea. "I'm her sister. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because I need to know the truth." Her voice did not carry a threat. It carried the immense weight of her grief. And in that moment, Maria Sanchez saw not an accuser, but another woman, broken by the same man. The fight went out of her, replaced by a wave of weary resignation. The secret she had carried like a tumor for 6 years had finally been lanced. With a trembling hand, she opened the door wider and gestured for Elena to come inside, a silent admission of guilt and a desperate, unspoken plea for forgiveness. The house was a shrine to a life that had been purchased but never truly enjoyed, every clean surface and carefully placed trinket a testament to a hollow peace. They sat in a small, sunlit living room, the silence between them thick with unspoken history. Maria's hands trembled so violently, she had to clench them in her lap to keep them still. Elena did not press her. She simply placed the photograph on the coffee table between them, a silent witness to their conversation. She began to speak, not of lawsuits or investigations, but of Laura. She talked about her sister's brilliance, her passion for her work, her boundless joy when she found out she was pregnant. She painted a picture of the woman Alistair Finch had destroyed, giving her a name, a soul, a story that went beyond a stolen patent. Tears began to stream down Maria's face, silent tracks of a grief and guilt she had been forced to carry alone. She had not known the woman's name. To her, Laura had been a file number, a problem to be solved, a transaction to be completed. But now, she was real, and the weight of Maria's complicity became unbearable. The confession, when it came, was a torrent, a flood of words held back for too long. Maria spoke of the pressure, the subtle threats mixed with the life-changing sum of money. She described a man from a law firm, a man with cold eyes and a briefcase full of cash, who had explained that the mother was unstable, that the baby would be better off with a powerful family. She had told herself she was doing the right thing, a lie she had repeated like a prayer every night for 6 years. She recounted the process of creating a falsified birth certificate, of smuggling the baby out of the hospital through a private exit, of handing him over to a woman from an exclusive adoption agency. She had been a cog in a machine, a small but essential piece of a monstrous conspiracy. The name of the agency, she whispered, her voice hoarse, was the Nightingale Foundation. It was a boutique service for the ultra-wealthy, known for its discretion and its ability to solve impossible problems. This was the key, the Nightingale Foundation. It was the institutional link between the personal crime of the kidnapping and the corporate crime of the takeover. After leaving Maria's house, Elena felt no sense of triumph, only a profound and weary sadness. She now had her insider, her first human witness, but the cost of that testimony was the complete shattering of another woman's life. Back in Miller's apartment, they immediately began digging into the foundation. On the surface, it was a legitimate, if exclusive, adoption service. But as they peeled back the layers of corporate ownership, a familiar pattern emerged. It was a series of shell corporations, each one leading to another, a complex web designed to obscure the true source of its funding. It took them another week of painstaking work, cross-referencing incorporation documents and tax filings to find the connection they were looking for. The Nightingale Foundation was owned by a holding company, which was in turn a subsidiary of a private equity firm, and the majority shareholder of that firm was Alistair Finch. He had not just used a corrupt service, he owned it. He had built the very machine he needed to steal his son, a vertically integrated system of crime. This discovery changed the entire scope of their investigation. It was no longer about a single illegal adoption. It was about a pattern of behavior, a criminal enterprise hiding behind a veil of philanthropy and corporate legitimacy. Miller used his contacts to pull the foundation's financial records, looking for a single transaction that could tie everything together. They waded through years of encrypted files and coded ledgers, an ocean of numbers designed to conceal, not to reveal. Elena's mind, trained to see patterns in chaos, began to pick out anomalies, payments to doctors, to lawyers, to hospital administrators, all disguised as charitable donations or consulting fees. It was a vast network of corruption, and Alistair Finch sat at its center, a spider in a web of his own making. Meanwhile, Alistair was not idle. The quiet dismissal of a maid should have been a forgotten footnote, but the look in Elena's eyes had planted a seed of paranoia that had taken root and grown into a suffocating vine. He felt a phantom itch, a sense that something was wrong in the perfect order of his world. He hired a private security firm, the best and most ruthless money could buy, to do a deep background check on Elena Vargas. He wanted to know everything about her, to find a weakness, a pressure point he could use to ensure her permanent silence. He was a man who believed that everyone had a price, and if they couldn't be bought, they could be broken. He was certain that she was planning some kind of foolish lawsuit, some pathetic attempt at blackmail. He was not yet aware of the true nature of the threat, but his predatory instincts were on high alert. He began to move his assets, to shred old files, to reinforce the walls of his digital and legal fortresses. The security firm's report landed on his desk like a ticking bomb. It detailed Elena's academic history, her promising start in journalism, and most damningly, her familial connection to Laura. The name hit him like a physical blow. He had assumed the maid was a random, disgruntled employee. He had never imagined in his wildest, most arrogant nightmares that she was the sister. The blood in his veins ran cold. The threat was not external. It had been living inside his own home for 2 years. His paranoia exploded into full-blown panic. He immediately understood the scale of his miscalculation. He had not just fired a maid, he had unleashed an enemy who was intelligent, motivated, and intimately familiar with his life. He made a series of frantic phone calls, his voice a low, controlled hiss of fury and fear. He ordered his lawyers to begin burying every record connected to the Nightingale Foundation. He ordered his security team to find Elena, to watch her, to find out who she was talking to. The invisible war had just become terrifyingly real. Elena and Miller felt the shift immediately. Their search queries began to hit dead ends. Online records that had been public just days before were suddenly sealed or scrubbed from the internet. A source Miller had reached out to for information on Finch's holding companies abruptly stopped returning his calls. They were no longer chasing a ghost. They were in a direct race against an active and powerful adversary who was attempting to erase history in real time. The pressure intensified 100-fold. They worked around the clock, fueled by caffeine and a growing sense of urgency. They knew they were close, that the final piece of the puzzle was buried somewhere in the mountain of data they had acquired, but they were running out of time. Alistair's scorched earth campaign to cover his tracks was terrifyingly efficient. With every passing hour, another door closed, another trail went cold. The breakthrough came at 3 in the morning, in the dead quiet of the city. Elena's eyes were burning from staring at the screen, a cascade of numbers and legal jargon blurring in front of her. She was about to give up for the night when she saw it. It was a footnote in a quarterly financial report for the holding company that owned Nightingale, a report from 6 years ago that Alistair's team had apparently missed in their frantic cleanup. It was a single line item, listed under miscellaneous operational expenses, a wire transfer for $2 million to a numbered Swiss bank account. The transfer date was 2 days after Leo's birth. That, in itself, was suspicious but not definitive. But it was the authorization code for the transfer that made her breath catch in her throat. It was an alphanumeric string, LF Pat, CQ Final. Laura. Finch, Patent, Acquisition, Final. It was a message from the past, a piece of corporate shorthand that was a confession in plain sight. She stared at the screen, her heart pounding a deafening rhythm in the silent room. This was it. This was the weapon Miller had talked about. It was the irrefutable link, the cold, hard proof that tied the money from the stolen patent directly to the operation that stole her sister's son. It was not just a smoking gun, it was a signed confession etched into the unchangeable ledger of a bank transfer. She printed the document, the hum of the old machine sounding like a symphony. She held the piece of paper in her hand, the text still warm. It felt heavier than any object she had ever held, weighted with the full story of her sister's destruction and the promise of her redemption. A profound, chilling calm settled over her. The investigation was over. The hunt was done. She looked up at the whiteboard, at the chaotic map of their journey, and her eyes settled on the picture of Laura. The plan for the final confrontation began to form in her mind, not as a vague idea, but as a series of clear, precise, and devastating steps. The stage was Alistair's annual charity gala, his yearly coronation as the city's leading philanthropist. It was the perfect venue. He had built his empire in the public eye, and it was in the public eye that she would tear it all down. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a universe unto itself, a celestial sphere of glittering crystal and shimmering gold leaf. The air was thick with the scent of 1,000 hothouse flowers, their fragile perfume mingling with the crisp, effervescent aroma of vintage champagne and the subtle, expensive fragrances worn by the city's elite. A string quartet played Vivaldi from a discreetly placed dais, their music a delicate, sophisticated thread woven through the tapestry of murmured conversations and the gentle clinking of silver against fine china. Hundreds of guests, a veritable who's who of New York's financial, political, and cultural dynasties, moved through the space with the practiced grace of planets in their orbits, their diamonds and silks catching the light from the massive chandeliers like captured constellations. This was the annual Finch Foundation Gala, the apotheosis of Alistair Finch's public persona, a meticulously staged performance of philanthropy and power. It was here, in this temple of his own making, that he was to be crowned with a Family Values Award, a final gleaming jewel in his carefully constructed legacy. He stood near the stage, a king holding court, accepting congratulations with a smile that was perfectly calibrated, revealing nothing of the gnawing paranoia that had taken root in his soul since the day he had cast out his maid. He felt untouchable, insulated by layers of wealth and influence so thick that no earthly consequence could possibly penetrate them. Elena moved through the gilded crowd like a phantom, her presence a whisper of gray in a sea of vibrant color. She wore a simple, elegant, dark dress, a stark contrast to the glittering gowns around her, allowing her to blend into the periphery, to become part of the background scenery. In her hand, she clutched a small evening bag, inside of which lay not a lipstick or a compact, but a press pass bearing the name of the investigative journal and the stern, familiar face of Professor Miller. She was not a guest, she was a journalist on assignment, an agent of a truth that was about to detonate with the force of a star-going supernova. Her heart was not pounding with fear or anxiety. Instead, a profound and chilling stillness had settled deep within her bones, a state of absolute clarity and focus. She felt the collective weight of the past 2 years, of every polished surface, every overheard lie, every silent moment spent with the boy who should have been her family. She looked towards the stage, where Alistair was laughing with the senator, and felt nothing. No hatred, no anger, only the cold, impersonal finality of a long-overdue equation finally being solved. Her gaze swept the room, cataloging the exits, the locations of the massive video screens, and the position of Miller's contact, a young tech wizard disguised as part of the event's audio-visual team, who gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod from across the ballroom. Everything was in place. The moment arrived with a flourish of trumpets and a round of thunderous applause. Alistair Finch, his beautiful wife on his arm, ascended the few steps to the stage. He moved with an unassailable confidence, the master of his universe, soaking in the adoration of the crowd. He accepted the heavy, ornate award, holding it aloft for the flashing cameras of the press corps. The lights dimmed slightly, and he stepped to the podium, the 2 enormous screens behind him displaying the crisp, blue logo of the Finch Foundation. He began his speech, his voice smooth and resonant, filling every corner of the vast room. He spoke of legacy, of the importance of family as the bedrock of society. He spoke of his profound love for his son, Leo, the bright future he was building for him, a future built on integrity, hard work, and the sacred trust between a father and his child. Elena stood near the back of the room, her body rigid, listening to the cascade of beautiful, empty words. Inside her mind, the image of her sister's frail form in a hospital bed rose unbidden, a stark and brutal counterpoint to the polished hypocrisy unfolding on the stage. This was it. She met the gaze of the technician one last time and gave him the signal, a slow, deliberate blink of her eyes. The change was instantaneous and absolute. The blue Finch Foundation logos on the massive screens behind Alistair flickered once, twice, and then dissolved not into blackness, but into the grainy, faded colors of a single, cherished photograph. There, magnified to the size of a billboard, was the radiant, joyful face of Laura, her smile a beacon of a life that had been stolen. And in her arms, wrapped in a simple white blanket, was the unmistakable face of a newborn Leo. A collective gasp, a single, sharp intake of breath from 1,000 lungs, swept through the ballroom, a sound that seemed to suck all the air from the room. The murmuring ceased. The string quartet faltered into silence. Every eye was fixed on the image, a ghost at the feast, an impossible truth that defied the carefully constructed reality of the evening. Alistair, caught mid-sentence in his paean to fatherhood, faltered. He turned, his confident smile freezing on his face, as he saw the projected image of his greatest crime, the secret that was the dark, rotten core of his entire existence, displayed for the entire world to see. The color drained from his face, his skin taking on the waxy pallor of a corpse under the harsh stage lights. Time seemed to stretch and stop, the silent accusation of the photograph hanging in the air like a death sentence. Then came the second strike, a digital tidal wave that crested and broke in perfect synchrony. In the silent, cavernous ballroom, a new sound arose, the unified electronic buzz of hundreds of cell phones vibrating at once. Every guest, every reporter, every senator and socialite looked down at their screen to see a notification from the country's most respected investigative journal. The headline was a masterpiece of brutal clarity: The Nightingale's Cage, How Alistair Finch Stole a Legacy and a Son. Below it was the first paragraph of a meticulously researched, heavily documented exposé, complete with scanned copies of falsified birth certificates, bank transfer records, and a sworn, on-the-record affidavit from a former maternity nurse named Maria Sanchez. The story laid bare the entire monstrous conspiracy: the hostile takeover, the stolen patent, the sham philanthropy of the Nightingale Foundation, and the kidnapping of a dying woman's child. The guests looked up from their phones, their faces a mixture of shock, horror, and a dawning, sickening understanding. They looked from the damning evidence in their hands to the giant photograph on the screen, and then to the man at the podium, a man who, just moments before, had been the paragon of virtue and was now revealed as a monster. In that moment of perfect, cataclysmic chaos, Elena stepped out from the shadows. She walked slowly, deliberately, towards the stage. Her simple dress, a stark contrast to the glittering opulence around her. The crowd parted for her as if she were royalty, their shocked faces turning to follow her progress. She did not say a word. She did not need to. Her very presence was the final piece of evidence, the living embodiment of the truth that had just been unleashed. She stopped at the foot of the stage and looked up at Alistair Finch. Their eyes met across the chasm of his ruined life. He saw not a maid, not a servant, but the architect of his destruction, a figure of righteous, implacable justice. The hatred in his eyes was a raw, primal thing, but it was overshadowed by a far more powerful emotion, sheer, unadulterated terror. He opened his mouth to speak, to deny, to threaten, but only a dry, croaking sound emerged. His wife, standing beside him, stared at the phone in her hand, then at the image on the screen, a silent, guttural sob escaping her lips as she finally understood the depth of his betrayal. The first camera flash went off, a brilliant, blinding strobe, followed by another, and another, until the entire room was a roaring, flashing storm of public condemnation, the sound of his world collapsing into dust. What was the most satisfying moment of Alistair Finch's downfall for you? Let us know in the comments. The ensuing implosion was total and swift. His carefully crafted persona shattered into a million irreparable pieces under the relentless glare of the public eye. Federal investigators, spurred by the irrefutable evidence in the published report, opened sweeping inquiries into corporate fraud, insider trading, and a host of other crimes related to the takeover of Laura's firm. Criminal charges for kidnapping and conspiracy followed shortly after, the testimony of Maria Sanchez and the damning paper trail from the Nightingale Foundation forming an ironclad case. His wife, herself a victim of his monstrous deceit, filed for divorce and became the prosecution's star witness, her testimony painting a portrait of a man so consumed by his desire for a legacy that he was willing to build it on a foundation of stolen lives. His empire, once thought to be an unshakable pillar of the financial world, crumbled under the weight of scandal and litigation. The board of directors forced his resignation, his assets were frozen, and the name Alistair Finch became a permanent synonym for hubris and corruption, a cautionary tale whispered in the boardrooms he once dominated. His fall was not a gradual decline, it was a plunge from the highest peak into the deepest abyss. The months that followed were a quiet, steady process of rebuilding. Elena, with the steadfast legal guidance of a pro bono team assembled by Professor Miller, navigated the complex and emotionally fraught legal system. She did not seek vengeance in the form of a massive financial settlement for herself, asking only for what was right. She successfully petitioned for, and was granted, full legal guardianship of her nephew, Leo. The day she walked him out of that cold, sterile penthouse for the last time was not a day of triumph, but one of solemn, quiet relief. She was not just rescuing a child, she was reclaiming a piece of her sister's soul, fulfilling the sacred promise she had made in the dim light of a hospital room so many years ago. They moved into a modest but warm and light-filled brownstone in Brooklyn, a home filled not with priceless art and minimalist furniture, but with the sounds of laughter, the smell of freshly baked cookies, and the beautiful, chaotic mess of a life being truly lived. She surrounded him with photographs of his mother, telling him stories of her brilliance, her kindness, and her radiant smile, ensuring that Laura's memory was not a tragic footnote, but a living, breathing presence in their new life together. Elena did not return to the world of corporate journalism, a world she now saw as part of the same system that had created men like Alistair Finch. Instead, she used the substantial funds from the court-mandated restitution and the dissolution of Finch's assets to create something new, something born from the ashes of her family's tragedy. She established the Laura's Promise Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to two simple, powerful missions: providing grants to brilliant, independent researchers in the biotech field, ensuring their work could never be stolen by corporate predators, and funding a legal aid clinic for victims of corporate crime, giving a voice to those who, like her sister, had been silenced and crushed by the powerful. She became a quiet force for good, wielding her own form of power, one built not on tyranny and deceit but on truth, empathy, and an unwavering commitment to justice. Her journey from an invisible maid to a celebrated advocate was a testament to the enduring power of courage, proving that the deepest wounds can be transformed into the greatest strengths, and that one person, armed with the truth, can indeed change the world. If Elena's incredible journey from underdog to powerhouse inspired you, show your support by hitting that like button and sharing this story with someone who needs to see it. And for more unforgettable stories of justice and empowerment, don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell.